October 23rd will come to order. Could we have a roll call, please?
Mr. Lear?
Present.
Mr. Legess? Mr. Washington?
Present.
Mr. Hess? Mr. Byrne?
Present.
Ms. Weber?
Present.
Mr. Payton?
Present.
Ms. Parker?
Present.
Mr. Kinzinger?
Present.
Mr. Zenz? Ms. Haas?
Present.
Mr. Swanson?
Present.
Ms. Zucolo? Mr. Dunnell? Mr. Wheeler?
Present.
Mr. Seroy?
Present.
We have a quorum.
We have one request for public comment. Mr. Lee, Jake Lee.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I want to start out by acknowledging today is Domestic Violence Awareness Day, and so that's part of the reason I'm wearing a purple tie, and those who are wearing purple to support Harbor House, we do appreciate it. I rise this morning today out of deep concern for two measures that are on the agenda for a vote today, being the county budget that has been proposed and the updated fiscal policy. I want to just kind of educate quickly about the Government Accounting Standards Board, or GASB for short, states that we live in a representative democracy. The citizens delegate their authority to public officials through the election process. And in the construct of government, as you know, the executive branch submits budgetary requests to the legislative branch. But county government is a little different. County government, the county board serves as both the executive and the legislative branch, which obviously creates some environmental and inherent conflicts as it relates to risk and budgetary control and financial reporting, because the county board effectively requests and predetermines budgetary numbers, as in the case specifically of the auditor's office, to itself. It approves those submitted requests, and then it appropriates expenditures based on the very requests that it has created and approved. The auditor's office, as some of you may or may not know, was inappropriately separated about 16 years ago, whether it was by fraud or error, but through a process of misapplication, whether it was through misunderstanding or what have you, of the Sarbanes-Oxley and ensuing regulations that came out of the Enron scandal. The county board at the time, unfortunately, exercised authority it did not have to alter the duties, powers, and functions of an elected office, and that practice is perpetuated today. We have seen through the budgetary process that the continued impediments financially and the structural and organizational impediments on the elected office of auditor continue today. And it is codified in the policy that you will vote on later. We have some highly competent individuals in the finance and accounting areas of this county. But my fear is that those individuals may not be able to speak up to individuals who domineer the administration. And those individuals can't say the true application and interpretation of accounting processes that relates to the elected office. Both of these documents do three things. They circumvent the will of the people by directing resources to several appointed individuals and individuals other than the county auditor, because according to the AG, general accounting duties may not be delegated to any officer other than the county auditor. The delegation of the duties to persons other than the elected official is exactly what this budget and the policy that is proposed that you're going to vote on does. The second thing that the policy does not do, it does not address at the most basic level what accounting actually is. And it errantly equates data entry to general accounting. The policy errantly reserves accounting functions to people other than the duly elected countywide auditor, which is an abuse of power and it's an abuse of discretion. Accountants are involved in more than just data entry and bookkeeping. Their work includes evaluating the effectiveness of operations, transactions, the overall picture of the health of the organization, effectiveness and efficiency of compliance, auditing tax planning, forecasting the results of future operations, and designing efficient accounting systems or accounting information systems. relegating the elected office to a bookkeeping or data entry function where there are still individuals with control to manipulate the software behind any work that the auditor has done is a risk to our office, and we are not willing to accept that risk. It has been well documented that people who report to the administration have done things that involve changing information in the budget and in the accounting software system, and we in the auditor's office will not expose ourselves to the risk that's created in this document. The fiscal policy document taken together with the budget does not represent a basic accounting concept, namely substance over form. These two documents merely express and codify a form of accounting and general accounting practices being changed, but not the substance of those practices being in compliance with state law, state statute, federal standards. I know there's nothing that I can say this morning that will convince this committee to vote against or alter this egregious document that has been crafted at the direction of our leadership. However, I will say that the auditor's office is established by state law and is commissioned by the governor's office of the state of Illinois to work on behalf of the people of Kankakee County who have elected their auditor. This committee, I want you to understand, does not have the authority to enact what will be enacted by this policy that continues to perpetuate the alteration of the duties, powers, and functions of the elected office and uses the budget as a weapon, essentially, to continue to impede the office from faithfully executing its duties. I hope that you will consider these comments. I hope that you will deliberate among yourselves and not just rubber stamp this policy because it does not satisfy the statutory authority that is vested in the duly elected auditor's office. Thank you for your time.
Are there any other requests for public comment? Hearing no other requests for public comment, we'll move on. There are no presentations today. The minutes for September 25th have been distributed. Is there a motion to approve? Mr. Payton first, second, Mr. Washington. All in favor of approving the minutes, say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Motion carries. We'll turn to the Finance Department. Mr. McCarty. You have distributed in your packet the miscellaneous financial reports. We will discuss those reports with the sales tax analysis, the inmates, bed rental, detainee, use tax, income tax analysis, and replacement tax analysis. Good morning.
Good morning.
Let's turn this on. And what can you tell us in terms of these reports?
Good morning, everyone. First up, sorry, I'm trying to get over medicine hasn't kicked in yet for my cold to keep my voice cleared. Yeah, this morning in the main documents that we look at, still watching sales tax real close, you know, and the activity that's going on there. But the bed rental, the income tax, use tax, and especially PPRT tax came in, had a really nice bump this month of $134,000, higher than the same month a year ago. So we did get communication from the state that the PPRT was estimated to go up by 14%. So we'll keep an eye on that. We didn't budget to the full 14%, but as you can see, that the trend is increasing there. So, and included just trend for Village of Bradley, Bourbonnais, City of Kankakee as well. So, won't spend a lot of time unless anybody's got any specific questions. There's a lot of information to cover this month.
Are there questions, Mr. Kissinger?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is just a matter of information. I've noticed that the sales tax also is down. Do you see this as a trend in the county? You've got a lot more experience looking at this than I do.
You know, I think it's, if you look at the breakdown between, within the municipal and the unincorporated areas, I think the difference is in the unincorporated areas primarily in the way the months have flowed through compared to like a year ago. So, so there's still a possibility of correction there. And as you look at previous years, the trend, you know, in the unincorporated, the CT column, can fluctuate for the various times of year. So that's the main fluctuation. So we'll keep an eye on, you know, I don't know if that's trend or not, because it does jump around quite a bit, you know, if you look at history.
I was just wondering if it had anything to do with the farm economy and dealerships and agricultural related businesses in the county.
It's a very good possibility that's what's affecting it, you know, and then what month it happens in is very unique, as you see in other years. You know, September, October was high in 2016. So, you know, that's something that we'll keep an eye on. So that may end up trending us lower depending on how the rest of the year goes. So we've kind of planned around that, you know, then keeping an eye on that in the budget.
I saw
Yeah.
that.
Are there other questions on the financial reports? Seeing none, we'll move to cash flow update, please.
All right. Yeah, we're updated through September of 2019. We got October, November estimated. I've got a lot of work done for next year, and we'll bring that now that we've got a lot of the budget items all identified and important things, as we'll hear in a minute, insurances and those types of things identified. We'll take a look now into 2020 and have the conversation, you know, whether or not to do another TAW, et cetera, and just look at the trends going forward. So everything's flowing as expected, so I don't have a lot to add right now, unless anybody's got any questions on this document at this point.
Are there any questions on cash flow? If not, then we can move on. We have one item not recommended for approval. This has to do with a audit which this committee and the full county board had previously approved. Do you want to speak to it?
You know, all I know is the note that showed up on the document. That's how we received it. So not recommended, and so it's brought to the committee. It's for the second line, I believe, anyway, for the agreed upon procedures related to credit cards. I believe the not to exceed number was 3,000 or 3,500 right now. The exact numbers escaping me that the county board approved, so it ended up being 2,100 and 2,150. So basically, from the committee, we're just looking for recommendations so that we can process this claim to SKDO.
Mr. Kinja,
I move that we pay the invoice as stated.
is there a second? Mr. Washington seconds that. Any discussion? Hearing no discussion, all in favor of approval? Well, we need to, no, that'll be a roll call vote.
Mr. Lear,
Aye.
Mr. Washington,
Aye.
Mr. Byrne,
Aye.
Ms. Weber,
Aye.
Mr. Payton,
Aye.
Ms. Parker,
Aye.
Mr. Kinzinger,
Aye.
Ms. Haas,
Aye.
Mr. Swanson,
Aye.
Mr. Wheeler,
Aye.
motion carries.
Okay, we move to the fiscal year 2020 tentative budget. You've received a packet with the draft appropriation budget.
There were some changes, just the notes here right up front from the document, the draft document you received Friday. There's a couple of changes. One positive for the general fund. We got a call from Tom Latham mid-morning on Monday that he found out that the state increased 2 of his current employees the salary reimbursement, or what we call grant and aid, the GIA. And it's an additional $137,000. So that was added in to the probation grant and aid, or GIA line, in the general fund. So they upped the reimbursement amount for 2 current employees. So there was not an addition of employees to get that. They changed the status of 2 existing employees. And then we received additional information for work comp and the general liability auto under ICRMT insurance for the tort fund. And then we added the 911 budget. We're still missing the health department budget. They're still finalizing because of a grant that they're trying to find out about. They believe it'll be ready next week, so we'll get that included before the full board. And then a family emergency delayed our meeting with the circuit clerk. She has some items she'd like to discuss, so there may be, there's a potential. I don't know what the information is at this point between now and the full board, so I just wanted to share those changes with you, as far as from the document that you received Friday in the email. So you want to go section by section?
Yes, please.
Okay. So first off would be the general fund, and we included general fund, tort, pension, fund balance trend. Another little bit of a history thing there. I won't spend a lot of time, since we have spent quite a bit of time on that the last few months, but I will note that our estimated year in 2019 for the tort fund, that it is back to and exceeded the level that it was at in 2008. So as general fund and tort continue to improve, the tort fund is now reached its previous level. So that's a note of good news there. So yeah, I don't know if there's specific questions. I have some notes on just items included in here. So we'll do the general fund revenue first. If somebody has a specific question, let us know. This is meant to be interactive, so please let me know. The one important thing that we'll look at for the general fund, tort, and pension on the property tax is you'll see it affected mainly in the tort fund, that we adjusted tort fund levy, which we haven't approved the levy. That'll be out we'll deal with that in the November meeting. But we adjusted for the second year in a row to the general fund, and also the majority of it went to the pension fund. And as you recall, Anita and I did a presentation on the changes that IMRF is sending us for next year. So we were able to make those adjustments and fit everything in. So just in a general, but we'll get to tort and pension here in a second. But so the property tax in the general fund includes a little extra bump beyond the regular change, the regular percentages that go into that. We've kind of ramped down sales tax a little bit from what we had previously. We're actually matched up to FY19 budget. The other taxes, if you will, are just either trend or information we receive from the state on expectation and what they were seeing. They do put out some information on a few of the items in here. For the various I'm going to skip over here just a second, and we've had a few questions in administration of the next to last line, the sale of capital assets. Had a question about that. That is for the sale of our portion of the River Valley Juvenile Detention Center in our agreement with Will County. Until we get through that whole agreement, that's part of the transactional area that goes through. So that's what that is there. The other fees and fines, various fees, fines throughout the departments, for various departments, are basically all trend at this point, and what's available to us at right now. So
Mr. Kissinger?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm a pretty simple guy, and when I look at a budget, the first thing I look at is revenue, and then the second thing I look at is expenses, and make sure, first of all, that's balanced. And one of the things I noticed in this budget is that we're down $400 and some thousand projected revenue, and then offsetting expenses. Now, revenue is easy to go down. How do you, just in summary, how do you cut $400,000 from revenue and expenses? Is there something simple, or is it a long involved process?
Where are you
Well, I'm on the
referencing that?
general fund summary, draft budget fiscal year 20, page, very first fiscal year 20, then general fund section 1, general fund summary.
Okay.
Draft budget fiscal year is 30. Oh my goodness, I read it backwards. Sorry.
Oh, okay, well, I was, I was trying to
Inverted
follow.
numbers. Sorry for taking your time. Wow.
All right, we're turning your mic off.
Okay.
All right, let's go through any other questions in
Something
regard to
I was trying
revenue.
to follow, I was trying to figure that one out, trying to find that one.
Now, if I might, circuit clerk's having some changes because of the new law in regard to bail bond and all that. Do we feel we're starting to get a grasp of that, or do we think that's something that's still going to be in flux throughout the next year?
Yeah, I mean, we've only a few months into it. His question's about circuit clerk department and their transactions. At this point, I can tell you we were trending from earlier in the year before the new activity went into place, about 60,000 roughly below what we were a year ago. And the most recent difference is now around $10,000 difference. So it actually trended up a little bit. So I don't know if that's a trend or not though,
Yeah.
because it's that early. But as far as what we can see right now, so basically I just use what's available right now because that's all we have, and we'll obviously keep a close eye on that. I know early estimates we were trying to figure out, is it 10, is it 15% drop, what percent drop, but right now there's no evidence of that, but at least in the general fund, we're watching the other special funds closely. There may be a trend change in a special fund. So
All right,
that's still, we'll watch it closely and discuss as needed as we go.
anything else on revenue questions? Ms. Weber?
No, nothing.
Oh, okay. You had a question?
My questions were, I had listened to Mr. Rogers talk about the cost of salt, and I wondered if, did that get increased in his budget? I was looking for it, and I'm kind of.
That's under special funds. If you could kind of hold that until we
Okay,
get through
I
the
will.
general funds. Is that
Yeah,
correct?
right, it's back in the
So
highway
let's hold
section.
that until we get to special funds.
And
All right,
the
we'll
other
come
was,
back to that, please.
the other question was about health insurance cost increase.
Yeah, we'll have that in expense. Yeah, and we're just right around the corner here. Was there any other? And as I mentioned, let's see, where's probation at? Probation is on page 3, a little over halfway down, or 3/4 way down. Sorry. You can see that there's a significant change in the grant and aid salary, GIA salary line, probation non-grant. So not only the change from Friday, but there's also, in addition, the state authorized 4 new positions, fully 100% funded. So you will see a change not only in revenue but also in expense on the probation side, but the expense and what they're reimbursing us for is higher than the revenue increase is higher than the expense change as we went through, because of they kicked up, increased. Not only did they do the 4 new, but they increased current position as well in their funding. So I believe I'm explaining that correctly.
Any other revenue items you want to call to our attention?
There's a lot of new grants, a few new grants, I shouldn't say a lot of new grants, and a couple of changes to existing grants. Like I said, most of it's trend change, unless someone has any other questions specifically.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Lear. Mr. Chairman and Steve, you know, it's been a long time since we've seen positive growth in our general fund, and our tort fund balances are all balancing out. You know, I'm looking at a 6-year negative, and I just want to go back to the Committee of Five that this is a lot of their vision that happened expeditiously with this process. So it's happened a little sooner. So I would like to acknowledge the Committee of Five's work a long time ago that's put us in this place. So and there's a lot of hard work in this room and in your office, Steve, to make sure this budget has been balanced, and we're finally at a balanced budget this year and looking forward to, you know, fruitful years to come. So I thank the Committee of Five now, because their vision has come to light, and in your office, Steve. Thank you.
Mr. Byrne.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As a member of the Committee of Five, along with Chairman Wheeler, who were on the committee, I want to thank Mr. Seroy, but it took everybody in this current board and previous boards and all our countywide officials and departments to make this happen. And the finance department, Steve has been great, and he's, you know, he had a rough few years there. And, you know, I'd like to acknowledge everybody that's been involved in this process. It's been a long process, and I can probably, you know, Chairman Wheeler can back me up on this. Nowhere did we ever foresee this happening at such an expedient rate. We were thinking, what, a decade out? At least. And I mean, it was pretty dire. And it took everybody, and, you know, you hear some naysayers and innuendos being thrown out there, but this has been done the right way, very transparent, and done the right way. So I just want to thank everybody involved.
Mr. Wheeler.
Just one quick question. Could you tell the committee about the budget process? What the meetings were like, you know, just so they understand, you know, the group of people that were involved in developing this budget?
Yeah, this particular this budget, Mr. Seroy, Mr. Lear, Chairman Wheeler, Anita Speckman, myself, sat and went over the you know, the questions or requests, you know, the insurance changes, you know, all the items of variance that show up, and basically we started out back in July and into August, communicating out to the departments what their any changes, needs. You know, we made phone calls, emails, you know, asking them for their input. We create a spreadsheet working document that they can interact in for all the special funds. We send it out to them so that they can interact, and it'll calculate for them, you know, revenue, expense, fund balance change, you know, for what they do, what they're looking for their special fund. So we send a lot of information out, ask for, you know, the information and their requests to come back in, and then as the committee met, you know, we go over the various things that, you know, that show up or requested, et cetera. So insurances, you know, the like. So so it's quite a extensive process. It takes, you know, a lot of input, and you know, the departments, you know, they have to take time out of their busy schedule to communicate back to us, and so that, you know, everybody did so, and this is the result of that information that we received. So
Yes.
Thank you. How would you characterize the tone or demeanor? Was it a free exchange of ideas, or was it domineering in any way?
no, free exchange of ideas. So
Thank you.
yeah, this has been one of the best budget for that reason. So yeah, yeah, the departments, you know, they don't cringe when you call and ask them about budget time, you know, like we were in the past, and you know, their fear of what are you going to take from me this time, and you know, so it was yeah, much better, much more pleasant process, that's for sure.
Mr. Byrne.
A follow-up question. So this wasn't two people in a room and then coming out with a budget saying this is it.
No, there's a lot of work, a lot of communication. Yeah.
And there was negotiation that went on. It wasn't always agreement, so that it took time to come to final figures.
And I will add, everybody has had a chance to provide input for this budget, for this document.
Any other questions, comments at this point? If not, we'll move on. Oh, Mr. Chair.
Were there requests that were not met as far as what we allocated in the budget beyond? Because I can think of three that
Yeah.
we did not grant the amount that was asked for. So I just, it was a revenue line and a couple of expense
There were
lines.
different departments that asked for
We
more money
went
than-
back and talked to those departments.
Okay, yeah, I'm sorry, there's a
So
lot
that
of
wasn't-
numbers.
there-
floating
there's
in my
no-
head,
there's no-
so
Of course.
I try to keep,
There
I
were
just wanted to
diff-
make sure that that was recognized as well. Not everybody
Yeah.
got everything they wanted.
okay, yes, thank you for reminding me of that.
Yeah, there were different departments that we had to go back and negotiate with. That's basically what happened.
Yeah, and I try to be the facilitator of getting information to the budget committee and also to you. So yes, there were a few changes. There's a lot of information that flows through, and there's with the we've gone when you get into health insurance and you get into every single aspect when you deal with tort pension and the like, there's just a lot of numbers and information. So you got to have a group to be able to filter through everything and get to this point where we're at now. So
Other questions or comments? Expense, then, are we ready for?
yeah, if no other questions on revenue, we can go to expense. We carry over the revenue line just to bring it all together as it comes to fund balance on page 2, but an important line that Chairman Wheeler added in to this document is the interfund debt reduction line, the first line, and it's important because we've been identifying as many dollar amount as much as we can to apply and pay back the interfund loans, the TAWs, et cetera, to get cash back up as available, so all the interfund and exterior debt reduction that we can. So that's still a number there, and it's first and foremost. And then as far as other items, and if you have some elections, you'll see a change there, but it's a presidential election coming up, so that kind of mirrors 2016 trend, not necessarily the last couple of years. So another one, building and grounds requested that the committee approve an additional employee that's built in there. The health insurance right now, we're basically flowing at trend, and that information will show up next. And you'll understand why, so I won't go into that because there's a lot of other information coming, but you'll understand why we're at trend here in a few minutes. Utilities, I originally had that higher, but after last month's finance committee, we found out with the new agreements that gas and electric savings, and then we in the finance department have been working with AT&T, and we're still watching. They owe us $60,000 that we're still waiting for a credit, and as well as they have changed the current billing that they were misbilling. So this is about $100,000 catch and change that we've found with them, and we're still waiting on that. But that's also included in here. ICANN Truancy. There's a jump there, but that's not an additional employee. They have been paying, because of our situation, fiscal situation, they have been paying an employee out of their reserves, and they were requesting the additional $20,000 to because their reserves are getting low in the area that they were using, is my understanding. So they requested an additional amount for that. Capital development, There is an attachment that has the list there. It's would be after the second page of the expense. Just shows the increase, the changes, you know, to the leases that we've done, and also a 1 year repayment to our local public building commission. That is for the parking lot and the building next door. That was done in 2012, and as well as well, it was not only the building that demolished it and then the pavement, but also a lot, a house and a lot, the same around the courthouse area. That was all done in 2012, and we have never had the ability to pay them back until now. So that's a 1 year repayment for that activity of $133,000 built in. Plus, as you all know, the additional, or the new leases, not additional, we needed the leases that happened this year. You know, and then one of them is estimated because I know that it's still in process. All I could do is estimate at this point, and it's being adjusted, if I'm understanding right, to some level here coming up. Unless anybody's got any pages on page 1, we'll go to page 2 of the expense document. Any other questions?
Mr. Wheeler?
Just a quick mention, thank you, Mr. Chairman, the central services line item, I can't, our payroll processing is through the roof, so we'll probably be coming back after we do open enrollment, and I hope Joanne's not watching this on the video right now, but we're probably gonna look at asking the board to look at other payroll processing options. We originally thought it was gonna be a great deal at 25,000, and I believe it's up around 90. Is that where we're at roughly, Steve? I mean, it's way up there. Yeah, it's 90. And so after we get through the season, so to speak, I won't burden HR with that, but we should probably look at that as a board. And it's not the best, let's just say. After 3 years, they finally got all the right codes in there. Well, not the ones that make the system work the best on deductions and things, but it's just still unwieldy and expensive. So just want to mention that.
Any other questions in terms of page 1 expense? If not, page 2. Do you have anything on that? Page 2.
Oh, page
expense.
2, okay, yeah. That's what I was studying actually as we were turning over. Yeah, it was aforementioned few changes in the grants. You can see the AmeriCorps grant that the state's attorney's been discussing, and that's one of them that has been discussed a lot here recently and is now in the budget. The public defender, Chairman Wheeler referenced it yesterday in executive as far as the changes and the work that they're doing there. I don't know, Chairman Wheeler, if you have anything else to add besides what you said yesterday.
Just that the whole increase is not the additional staff, it's also there is an increase in the full-time public defender pay. So sure, that's why he came today, to make sure we okay that. But no, that was it.
And we're looking for more efficiency out of that
Exactly.
office, which will create some benefits down the road.
As is the chief public defender. That's why we're on the same page.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, so and then probation, you can see there was a jump there, but those positions are fully funded from the state. And again, the revenue was higher than the expense. The juvenile center, there's the expense side. And as you can see, we left DNDC alone. That's a juvenile placement. That's directed by the chief judge, and right now there's very little activity there, but we leave that there for that activity. So it's different every year, but so that's just kind of the trend, and that's to the purview of the chief judge. So other specific items of, you know, the drug court grant is now getting ramped up, and that was discussed, you know, quite a bit a while back. coming in, so that's now showing up on the budget. Other than regular changes, I don't have anything else specific. Really
Any
to
questions
add,
on
unless
page two,
anybody else has anything
expenses?
else any other questions?
If not, you've already made some comments in terms of capital development worksheet, which is on the back. Are there any questions on the capital development worksheet? Hearing none, do we do a separate motion for just the general fund?
Probably should do the whole document.
Or we'll do the whole document as one.
document, all right.
Okay.
So,
Mr. Byrne, did you have a? Right.
yeah, we probably should just do the whole document. Special funds, we have the WIA funds. I'll just go through this. If somebody has a specific question, I'll spend too much time on it. After the WIA funds, then you have the debt service funds for the bond payments. And then tort and pension, as I mentioned, you know, you'll see the lower property tax revenue in the tort fund, 200 is the number identified for tort. But as you can see, it still has area for growth, even though we've dropped the property tax down. So to help the other two funds out. And then pension fund, you can see the increase there as well, both revenue and expense, but still hopefully we'll have room, you know, to still grow in that fund as well for its fund balance that we're still concentrating on rebuilding. And
If I might.
okay.
Ms. Weber, you had a question in regard to a highway. Do we include that in special funds?
Well, it's got highways in its own section, so the rest of the various you know, computer funds and whatnot, you know, through that the various departments have control. So there's not, I don't know if there's a lot to really stop and focus on.
Okay, and
I know
unless there's some
somebody picked something
questions
up.
on some of those special funds with section 3, you move ahead to section 3 under
highway
highway funds. All right,
Question.
Mr. Wheeler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Steve, the VAC increase, was that around 11% that we gave them more in their budget?
Yes.
I think that's what we looked
In
at on
their
the levy.
in their levy,
In their
levy.
levy.
in their
Okay.
levy.
Okay.
Yes,
So we're
they.
increasing the levy by another 11%, which is roughly, what, 70% over the past?
Yeah, when that document
years.
shows up, the VAC has the highest levy percentage increase
Okay.
of all the areas.
Thank you.
All right, highway funds. Ms. Weber, you had a question there?
I guess it was under, I wondered if it was a supply, is that where it's listed, because it's a lower number?
Maybe Mark Rogers.
Mr. Rogers, could you speak to that?
Yes. Good morning. The salt is taken out of the county MFT budget. So back, a couple pages back, there should be MFT claims and charges. That's the line item it comes out of.
Motor fuel tax, page 5 of the highway.
So you're comfortable with where you can go? It's a hard thing to guess, obviously, but
Yes. Yeah. It's in the budget.
all right. Are there further questions there, Ms. Weber?
No, I see it. Thank you for that.
All right, and then, like I said, we're waiting for the health, and then the very last section has all the lease payments, bond payments, schedules, just for informational purposes, you know, that go into the various areas of the budget, so that the actual breakdown, so just for reference, so. So you know that it's there if anybody's interested in it, so.
Any questions on that?
So this document will go online after the meeting, and that will suffice. It's 15-day required review period, public review period before the full board votes on it, and we will inform of if any other changes show up that are taken into consideration.
Is there a motion regarding this budget? Mr. Byrne,
Make the motion to approve.
motion to approve. Mr. Washington seconds. Is there any further questions or discussion? Hearing no further questions or discussion, let's have a roll call vote, please.
Mr. Lear?
Aye.
Mr. Washington?
Aye.
Mr. Byrne?
Aye.
Ms. Weber?
Aye.
Mr. Payton?
Aye.
Ms. Parker?
Aye.
Mr. Kinzinger?
Aye.
Ms. Haas? Mr. Swanson?
Aye.
Mr. Wheeler?
Aye.
Motion carries.
That concludes Finance Department. Unless someone has some further questions, we'll move on to Administration Department. Ms. Speckman.
Knock it out of the way.
I will start off with the group health insurance information. You've got information in your packet in regard to that. Mr. Lynch will help us also here. Very good. Good morning.
Good morning. I'll let Mike do most of the talking, but the first thing is the group health insurance renewal, and in your packets, you've got a sheet that looks something like this, and that's an overview of costs between the 4 plans that we have currently and a competitive bid that we received from Blue Cross Blue Shield. Mike's going to talk through the differences, but essentially what happened was Mike was able to take our census out and get a competitive bid from Blue Cross Blue Shield. And what we did was not ask them to exactly mirror the United Healthcare plan we have, because that would be a custom plan, but to find their plan that is most close to the 4 that we have currently. So by doing so, it's their pricing. If we did a customized plan, that would be an extra 5%. So Mike can talk through kind of what he's done. Really, it's Mike's group that has helped us through this process. So
Thank you.
take it away.
I think as the process started, you'll remember at the last meeting, we talked about the experience, and it had turned from very, very good approximately a year ago. It ran in the 66% range. Here recently, that got into the upper 80s. And I feared that, at that point in time that, it might mean either a stiff increase or something that wasn't going to be affordable. After that last meeting, we went out to bid with these carriers, and Blue Cross was the only one that came back. But initially, United Healthcare delivered an 8.5% increase. They immediately came off that to 6%. And then we got the bid back from Blue Cross Blue Shield, and then it created a mini bidding war, I guess is the best way to say it. At that point, when Blue Cross came back, we were able to secure rates from both carriers that were less than what was paid in 2019. So I think the best way to say this is that each one of these plans is as close to what exists as possible. And Anita's correct. If we customize any of those plans and make them exactly alike, Blue Cross, the first thing they do is say, okay, we're gonna charge you for doing that. So we didn't want to do that. But there, if you look at these plans, the first 2 columns is an HSA, the second 2 columns is an HSA. And between the 2 of them, there are 111 people in those 2 plans. The first 2 columns, that plan will be reduced by about 8.2%. And in Plan 2, that gets reduced about 19%. Now, the last 2, if you look at that, are the most popular plans, The third it has 121 bodies in it, and the last one has 163 bodies in it. And so those rates come out almost even of where they were. So for the employee, it's going to be a very, very good situation, we feel. So as we get to the end of this process, I guess the easiest way to explain this is that when you look at all the numbers, Blue Cross is lower than United Healthcare by about $57,000. So it's close, but they're lower by that amount. But that's not the only reason I think that Blue Cross has an advantage here, and I'll go to this extent. If you look at that page there, all of these plans that Blue Cross quoted use one network. You'll remember that United Healthcare had used 3 networks, and Choice Plus was their best network, most costly. The Blues just said, we'll use this one national network, so there is no choice for people to make relative to network, and I think that's a positive. We had a lot of problems early on because we had retirees out of state, and they couldn't get the lower cost, or excuse me, the lower deductible plan, because that was the Navigate plan, it was the HMO, and it wasn't available to them out of state. In this scenario, Blue Cross is going to provide a PPO versus an HMO, so that'll allow those people to make that choice if they wish to. So that's a big positive. 2 of the networks, Core and Navigate, the PPO network of Blue Cross's is much larger in the state of Illinois, but again, it's national. Last but not least, there'd be no referrals for people because the HMO, Blue Cross does offer an HMO, but it's only based at one hospital and not both. So Blue Cross has both hospitals here locally and a complement of Chicago hospitals, which is very, very large. So I think in terms of the 4 items that I mentioned, cost, the ability to get to a national network, to me, Blue Cross is probably the positive choice here because, and I do want to say that United Healthcare has been a joy to work with. They've been a fine carrier, they've done good things, but here in these situations, when you go back and forth, you know, it erupts into a kind of a mini bidding war. And at the end of the day, the Blues were lower, and I think it fits very well for the county. So I'd make that recommendation.
The only other thing that relates to the healthcare is those first 2 columns, that where it says core insurance, PPO, HSA, that is the plan that currently the county funds, and HSA for the employees that choose that plan. So that's $500 a year for single options, and anything either +1 or family coverage. Those people that opt into that plan receive $1,000 HSA contribution from the county. So we would also want to know if you want to continue with that option. That's a higher deductible plan, and that was always kind of the thought process of why the county funded that, to assist our employees in that.
Kisner?
So I'll turn the question around. How did it work?
Well, I think it was attractive. You've got 57 people that took advantage of that. And I think in the meetings that we've had, you know, a lot of people try to get into the lower of the 2 plans first and sock some money away. And the idea is if you could save up to that deductible, you could alternatively look at going to the $5,000 plan the next time where the contributions are. So I think it was well accepted, and you'll see that there are 54 people in the $5,000 plan, and there are 57 people, and when I say employee lives, I'm not counting all the dependents that are on the sheet too, but employee lives. So I think it's worked. I think people have taken advantage of the savings programs, and the ones that have done it and stashed the money away, I think are very happy with it. We had some young people that made mention that they'd been doing it, so that's good to know. And many of you may not know, every month Anita has a new employee meeting that we go to, and we explain details of the medical plans and talk about HSAs and things of that nature. So I think as long as that goes on, it's helpful in building the morale for those kinds of plans.
So summary, you'd recommend that we continue?
Yes,
that?
sir.
Okay.
The one thing that does change, is that this weekend, our provider for that HSA has always been Homestar, and they funded those accounts or at no fee charge to our employees. And with the change in bank ownership, that's going to $2 per month for any. Now I'm looking at Mark because he's the one who uncovered it all for me yesterday. If there's a balance of less than $1,500 in that account, they're going to charge our employees $2 a month. So that will be a change in that plan.
Do we have the option or the right, I'm not certain how that works, to check other local banks?
You can do that, and or there are other alternatives in the marketplace. Yes, I mean, there was never a reason to compare it to anything when there was no cost to it. It was a no-brainer.
Okay,
But
fine.
at the $2 range, I don't believe that that's out of the ordinary, but there are other entities outside the community and inside the community, I'm sure. It's about payroll deduction, though, and I think early on when they did that, they may have been the only institution that had the ability to do payroll deduction of that type. So yes, there are other alternatives now.
Mr. Wheeler?
Yeah, just to call attention to a couple things regarding the HSA, and then also the new plan. The drug card situation will change, so you may see some people migrate away from it because there is a drug card now, the 1015 or 103560.
Right.
It goes deductible and coinsurance. So if they do have regular meds, they may move from that into the PPO. Or they may take the higher level where it is just a percentage discount depending on the personal situation. That's something that we'll be making keenly aware to the employees when we make the new video that goes out. Every year we're sending the video and they watch it and their family watches it to make their choices, which is another great thing Anita's done. But then also if you're looking at the PPO option that's going to replace the HMO, we were talking and I thought you're going to see a lot of migration into that out of the one right next to it. The 50, 17, 20, 34 members in the little box there of the $5,000 deductible. I think the price difference, we're going to see a lot of people shift into that other one. There's not that much price difference for that.
Right.
Cut.
Right. We really saw people in that third plan because they didn't want an HMO. It's kind of a lot of monkeying around. Sometimes you run into troubles finding somebody in network or out of network. And so I think Andy's right. We're going to see some migration out of that higher deductible plan into that PPO now that that's replaced with a PPO.
And that's one of the reasons I want to mention that there's some flexibility in the health insurance number that's necessary because you got to leave something for migration. You don't know what's going to happen until December when people choose.
Right.
You know.
Yeah,
so.
and if you look at the benefit structures, a lot, you know, the only place in the whole thing that is a little bit different is the deductible of the Blue Cross product in the first plan. The second plan, Blue Cross's out-of-pocket is lower. The third plan, Blue Cross has an advantage in lower out-of-pocket maximum. And as Andy said, when you compare the third and the fourth options, there could be some migration one to the other. That's kind of natural, I think, because they'll see a lower deductible, a lower out-of-pocket for almost the same cost. And one of the things that can be done in the future is to, you know, maybe manipulate this in a different direction to have different structured plans than are here right now. But you know, here's what we bid. The RFPs went out under that situation, and this is what they came back with. You know, all told, I think, you know, United Healthcare was about 4% under last year's cost. Blue Cross was 5.5 and change under the last year's cost. So it's close, but the better number and the advantages is Blue Cross's.
Mr. Wheeler?
Something I just thought of, whenever there is a motion, it needs to include the funding of the HSA at the same level. That needs to be part of the motion. Usually it's two separate things. We need to combine it here, and then at the full board, we have to vote on each independently.
We can vote on,
We can vote on them here in
Combined
dissent,
here.
but at the full
All right.
board, we have to break them out into two.
thank you for that. Could we have a motion to accept the Blue Cross Blue Shield? Mr. Swanson, is there a second? Mr. Payton? Further discussion? Hearing no further discussion, let's have a roll call vote, please.
Mr. Lear,
Aye.
Mr. Washington,
Aye.
Mr. Byrne,
Aye.
Ms. Weber,
Aye.
Mr. Payton,
Aye.
Ms. Parker,
Aye.
Mr. Kinzinger,
Aye.
Ms. Haas, Mr. Swanson, Mr. Wheeler. Motion carries.
All right. We move now to liability property renewal.
Well, we do have, Mike, I want Mike to talk about the ancillary products, which are those
Okay.
offerings that are 100% paid by our employees. There's a few of those. They're not in here. Mike is still working on the renewals for those, but he can talk through where we're at with those.
The dental plan is with Delta Dental, and we're in the middle of a 24-month rate guarantee. So this is, right at the midpoint. Next year, that will have to go out. And so there's nothing to be done there. The rate continues forward. What I did want to tell you is that the experience rating there is lower than it was last year. We actually reduced the rates that the employees paid in the dental plan last year, and now the experience has been reduced. I don't know how to explain it other than they've gotten very people have used the preventative side of the dental plan to a great extent. There's very high usage there, so we must have a healthy group of people there.
Nobody's drinking soda.
There you go. The vision plan is with VSP. They are raising their rate. It's about a 6% increase, but you have to realize that, as an example, an employee, which this is a voluntary plan, they'll pay about individually 42 cents more per month. So it's not a huge dollar amount. I recommend staying with VSP because people have been very satisfied with it. And in the future, there may be some advantages at looking at other plans like Blue Cross that has a new vision plan, things of that nature. But I would say it's best to stay with VSP this year. No change in benefit and a slight change in rate. The county does pay for one plan. It's the group life insurance plan. It buys a $10,000 group term insurance plan on each employee, so it's 100% paid for. So all employees are given that. They also get AD&D with that. That plan is renewing for the same dollar amounts that was in the last 2-year agreement, which ends this year. But Dearborn National, which is a wholly owned subsidiary of Blue Cross, is renewing it for the next 2 years at the same rates. I recommend, staying there. Last but not least, Dearborn National also offers the group supplemental term life with AD&D, and those rates do not change. They would be guaranteed for 2 years. And at a point sometime down the road here, Dearborn National's name will disappear. It becomes Blue Cross Blue Shield Life. Imagine that. They've owned the company for 50 years, but why they had a different name, nobody knows. In any regard, that will become their new name. And, all four of those, I recommend, continuing on with the carriers that are listed, or as I
We didn't
stated.
take any action on that today. Right. All right, then we can go on to the liability property insurance renewal.
Yes,
But I just want to
Right.
thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your hard work. People don't realize Mike went in there and compared those plan to plan to match those himself. That's what a consultant does, and I just want people to know that's not easy. It's hard work.
There are thousands of them out there, and thankfully we got close on a lot of them. Some are better, some aren't, but I think they'll satisfy the people.
All right.
Thank you.
Liability property insurance renewal.
right. That's the next section in your packets, and it says, the first page says Alliant, Kankakee County. And there's two things in here. There's a 10-page document, which is the actual proposal that's going to need to be signed. And then right after that, it's what's called, they call towers, which is an overview of the actual coverages and deductibles. So that I thought was a good summary that explains there's a whole lot in this package. It is quoted by Alliant as one full package. And so if you turn to page 4, you can see a list of the different policies and then what the renewals are. In total, the property, liability, umbrella, work comp, all that last year was $1,615,643, and the renewal premium is $1,614,623. This year, if you'll remember in August, what we did with our cyber policy is just extend that to 12/1 so that they renew at the same time and are quoted. That's included in this package. So as a piece of that, in total, if we add that cyber policy went from 6,100 to just over 5,000. So a little bit of savings there. So in total, it's about $1,100 less in FY20 for the renewal with the exact same coverages that we have now.
Any questions? Yeah, a motion to approve this, Mr. Washington, Mr. Byrne. Other questions on the motion to approve? Mr. Byrne?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To piggyback on what was said earlier in the meeting, in the past with liability insurance, it was sometimes a hastily assembled meeting to approve. I appreciate all the details and discussion and transparency on that.
Hearing no further discussion, roll call vote, please.
Mr. Lear,
Aye.
Mr. Washington,
Aye.
Mr. Byrne,
Aye.
Ms. Weber,
Aye.
Mr. Payton, Ms. Parker, Mr. Kinzinger, Ms. Haas, Mr. Swanson, Mr. Wheeler, motion carries.
2020 Employee Assistance Program.
What happened this year, we've talked about this a few times in executive, is that our EAP provider canceled the county. We received a letter that just said, your plan is canceled and we're giving you your 30 days notice. I had not heard from any employees requesting information, so I thought, okay, it's not going to be an issue. Well, within a few weeks, I started to receive phone calls and I get them on a somewhat regular basis. So I think when I first came, there wasn't a lot of interest, but about once a month, I have an employee or an employee supervisor call asking for information about an EAP. So as Andy and I were talking about the budget for 2020, I asked if we could at least research an EAP, a replacement EAP. I actually tasked Mike with that, as I often do. And he did a fantastic job and actually came back with this big booklet proposal from 4 different companies. I think there's 9 different plans, and I'll let Mike talk through the differences in those plans. That is this sheet here, this grid that kind of outlines for you the costs. On the left-hand side, estimated costs. It's based on number of employees and then the actual types of coverages as you go across the page.
There are a couple of quotes here that, you know, are higher than others, but it was our hope that, you know, Nita put the spreadsheet together, and it's fantastic to look at. But the one that we concentrated on is an entity called Perspectives. And the reason for it is kind of simple. They do seminars on video with folks, and they do those on a monthly basis. They do have free webinars. Also found in their literature that they sent us, they've got over 100 governmental units that have used their services. And they'll provide a variety of monthly webinars, and they give you a list of them, and you can go through them and kind of do some picking and choosing. But the real key here is, I think when you get down to the right side of the page, you'll see that there's a 3-session and a 6-session in-person counseling basis. And really, an EAP is pretty worthless if you can't get to somebody and physically talk to them if the problem gets severe enough, and that's the key. And if you've got somebody that doesn't have any out or anybody to discuss some of these things, this the purpose of an EAP. It's to give them the opportunity to go to counseling, and nothing's revealed. So I think in terms of what I see here, I think any of these 3 perspective quotes are good, but the differentiation is really the counseling basis. And if you look at the annual totals that Anita came up with, their best plan annualizes out on 530 employees at $1.95 at $12,400. And the next one closest to it, I think, is the 3 counseling session, the 3 counseling. There's only $1,000 difference on an annualized basis there. I'd take the 6 is what I'm basically saying. And I think Perspectives is the entity that I would recommend. In addition to that, they come up with some utilization reports. Nobody is ever named in these, but there's statistics, what kinds of incidents have occurred, and things of that nature. Nothing that could be considered to be protected health information would be released to the employer, as an example. There's online reports that the county can get, and there's another section in here which gives an overview of everything that they will deal with in the webinars. So, having said that, each one of these in Cleveland Clinic, that's a great plan. I don't see anything wrong with that. But when it comes down to these webinars and the quality interaction, I think on a month-to-month basis, Perspectives has the inside track. So I would say, in my mind, I would look at that $1.95 cost of Perspectives and utilize that one.
Mr. Kissinger?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm somewhat cautious to ask questions. But I have 2. EAP is Employee Assistance Plan.
Yes.
And what is cost PEPM?
Per employee per month.
So it costs us $1.95 for each employee per month.
And the top 2, I should have said, or top 3 actually, are all from UHC. Well, that was predicated on, them being there. So,
And
there's a cost to 2 of the 3. The first cost, UHC Care 24, was included in the medical plans. So we're just noting that, I guess, is the best way to say it.
And we've had experience, we don't know if people are using this other than you've had a few call and say, we want it.
Right.
Do you have any experience that, any of you, that this is a good investment at $12,000 a month?
A year.
Total?
Yes.
Yeah.
Times 5, that's for all 500?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
So you have a cost, and then you have the annual estimated cost.
If it's 12 people, and I don't know whether it's 12 or it's 1 or it's 5, the option being there, I think, is a good one. Sorry, Andy, I didn't mean to.
I agree.
Mr. Wheeler?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think the key is with all of these is how you market it to your employees.
Right.
And so if we're gonna do this, we have to commit to also an ongoing program to remind them that these are available to them, not just at open enrollment.
Right.
There has to be something, a reach to those employees. Not everybody gets email, so you have to make sure whether it's posted on their boards or whatever. So if we're gonna do it, I would say we have to do the second part, market it.
Mr. Kissinger?
he brought up one other issue, and if I understood it now, I know what we're talking about, I think. We have the option as the employer next year to look at the utilization of this. So
Right.
that's a win for everybody.
And the last vendor didn't have any reporting mechanisms, so unfortunately, it just didn't exist.
Mr. Wheeler?
Oh, please, Jackie was.
Oh,
I was
Ms.
just curious about the provider network availability for the in-person sessions.
Yes.
Is that a wide network?
Yes, it's very wide, and don't know if we have a published one, but it's what they call a silent network, or in other words, they'll go out and meet with individual entities in different communities and get them signed up and make sure that they are, priced at a level that's appropriate. So they'll work with people too. So it's very comprehensive.
Mr. Wheeler?
Thank you. What part of this is, and a big part is to try to keep these situations off of your health plan, because it's much more costly for your health plan to absorb it. You start with this, and then you migrate to the health plan if it starts to present that there needs to be a higher level of service. So you would hope that you would save your health plan, at least what you're investing in the EAP. And you could probably do that with 1 or 2 employees. So just throwing it out there.
Especially now that mental health is part of medical coverage in general, which it should be. I'm not arguing that, but you're absolutely right on point.
Could we have a motion to accept one of these? Accept the perspectives at the $195 monthly cost, annual $12,400. Ms. Parker. Mr. Swanson seconds. Any further discussion on this? Hearing no further discussion, I'll roll call vote, please.
Mr. Lear,
Aye.
Mr. Washington,
Aye.
Mr. Byrne,
Aye.
Ms. Weber, Mr. Payton, Ms. Parker, Mr. Kinzinger, Ms. Haas, Mr. Swanson, Mr. Wheeler. Motion carries.
Yep.
There's nothing else for Mr. Lynn.
Thanks.
I need you to stay up here.
Right, and Steve's
And Steve's here. Okay.
Steve, are you coming down?
All right, we'll move to the financial policy management manual update. I think at this point it might be appropriate to make a couple of introductory comments. I would like to, as chair, we heard in public comment the auditor talking about some of his response to seeing this update, and it made reference to well-documented changes that had occurred in some financial things. I'm not aware that any of those changes had been brought to this committee in a way that we didn't know about. And I would hope that the auditor, if he's got specific information, could bring that to this committee, because indeed the information flowing from him to this committee is essential, and we are prepared to act on specific information that the auditor brings. But at this time, I cannot recall any that we have not responded to. There was also a comment in terms of our authority in terms of this manual. I would remind this committee that we sent a request to the Attorney General to help define accounting, and the Attorney General refused to do that, making it clear that that was something that we needed to make our own decision on. And so that is the point at which we're at, that we've gotten no specific guidance from the state. We've had to act on our own. I don't, Mr. Chairman, did you want to say anything before we
Nope.
go into this? All right. So we have this policy before us. You want to give us a background here?
Just as introduction, Steve and I were tasked by the board with revisiting the policy manual to comply with the auditor's duties state statute. So we did need to consider the federal generally accepted government auditing standards. It's known as the Yellow Book, which is, there's one page we attached, that's the first page here, government auditing standards. The page included is the page that indicates that municipal auditors are required to follow these standards as well. The bottom line is, with the movement of some of these accounting activities to the counties, to the auditor's office, we needed to implement controls that previously did not exist to ensure that we comply with the Yellow Book so we don't jeopardize our federal funding.
Excuse me, Yellow Book, I'm not familiar with that phrase.
Well, Yellow Book is kind of just the term that the accounting area uses to
County
just,
community is-
yes,
Sure.
it's the government auditing standards that are followed.
Thank you.
And those are the standards that are followed in terms of SKDO in doing our annual audit, the single audit, any of our grant audits that are done by either the state, federal level, anything that goes on out at the public health department. Those auditing standards are followed by anyone auditing those types of activities. So I just kind of wanted to give you a background of what we did or what we were taking into account as we looked at the changes that we made to comply with state statute. The revisions were done by Steve and I. We reviewed them with Todd Seroy, Andy, Steve Lear, and then they went out to all of you last Friday for any input. That's because internal controls, as defined, are the responsibility of management. Essentially, that's the county board, that's you. You're responsible for ensuring that this county has proper internal controls. So the changes overall, rather than, you can see they're extensive. We made the changes in red so you can track them where we put them. But essentially, the changes in the manual moves the following activities into the auditor's office. It's approval of all new chart of account entries, fund numbers, account numbers, grant numbers. The entry of all accounts payable. The compilation and entry of all adjusting journal entries, asset and inventory accounting, and fiscal year-end close. That starts FY20. So what will happen, as Steve and I talked through the difficulty here, because Steve's group is doing these activities now, it's probably easier for him to go through the audit and to go through the year-end close. It's his activity. He's got to own it. So he would finish up the audit this year, and then next year, as the auditor takes on these additional responsibilities for the FY20 fiscal year end, then he would take care of those issues. We did put a lot in there in terms of splitting up some of those in terms of posting. So in other words, although the auditor's office enters, the posting activity remains with finance. A limitation of the MIP system is that if you open posting, you open it for all functions. So you can't limit it to one section, and that's a problem. And when you post accounts payable, that posted in and those checks, Steve can talk more about how that works. His struggle is, what happens is those all are in the queue to be paid. There is no functionality within the system that you can limit it to certain run dates, certain invoice dates, et cetera, like that. So it is a cash flow function. When you post a certain batch or a certain number of accounts payable, you are essentially queuing those up to be paid. That's a cash flow function. So I don't know if you have had a chance to review. I had a few comments back from Mr. Lear that I'll incorporate in here. Behind the manual, you'll see there are 3 forms that we're using to kind of track through some of these activities. An adjusting journal entry form. So that gets completed and routed from the auditor's office through administration where those adjusting journal entries will be posted. The chart of account changes, that's completed by the auditor's office. And then the finance department works with the treasurer's office, because what happens when you set up a fund or an account, well, a fund really, or department, you're setting default cash accounts. So you're mapping that to a cash. And again, that goes to cash flow, and that's why we wanted that left with the finance. So, or treasurer's office, and then that gets routed back to the auditor's office. So he initiates it, it gets posted, and then it goes back for his check to make sure it's what he anticipated. And then the inventory change report, that's a current form that is utilized by the finance office. The budgeting and annual audit remain the responsibility of the county board, and so they remain with the finance department.
Mr. Kinninger.
Thank you. I have the utmost confidence in your and Steve's ability to put together a document that'll work well for the county. My question is, when I heard who developed this, has legal advice been sought in terms of, is it consistent with state and laws? Has anybody looked at this from a legal standpoint?
No, because, well, this is less about legal and more about accounting and auditing standards.
Okay.
I think that's all I want to say right now. There is nothing in here that changes a law, and as Steve Lear mentioned, we did not get guidance from the Attorney General's office that legally defined accounting.
My concern is not defining accounting, and I understand that can be an issue. My concern is that this is consistent, properly written in case of a legal challenge. And usually when you have this kind of document change, you at least want to have somebody look at it and say, yeah, you accountants did a good job.
Okay, thank you for your comment. Any other questions? Ms. Weber.
That's it. My question, thank you, is on page 12. It implies that I read all that way, but I just have there's three criteria listed there, and then a couple paragraphs down, it said only assets purchased that meet both. So
because the reason that is because the first criteria is an original cost of $5,000 or more, and then the next two are actually one, because if you look at the end of that line, it says and a useful life of 1 year or more. So a cost of $5,000 and a useful life of more, or assets that extend the life of a current. So it's really, lines 2 and 3 are really one thing.
very clear. Thank you very much.
Other questions? Mr. Wheeler?
Well, more of a statement. The first, when I first talked to Steve and Anita about the need to do this, was like almost immediately after the AG got back to us and said they weren't doing it. So I would say that was maybe 8 months ago, roughly. I mean, we were right at the beginning of the budget year, so we couldn't switch, but we had to prepare for this time. And the only real guidance that in litmus test I said was, anything that's accounting needs to be with the auditor's office, and anything that finance stays with the board. And was the guiding criteria for all of this work. And then to ask themselves those questions as throughout the process on a very, micro level. Everything that we're changing and doing, does it fill that legal obligation we have to comply with state statute? Something we've known we've been and working on this whole time to change in the new budget year. So I want to make sure that is known. That is their standard, is to keep that line drawn between the two.
Other questions, comments? Is there any more information you need to share? No?
Oh, there was a couple lines that Steve talked to me about. The payroll section doesn't talk about direct deposit, so I'm drafting a couple lines because the bulk of our employees now have direct deposit. So the policy manual really only talks about paper checks. So I'll add 2 sentences in there that relate to direct deposit and how that just feeds from Paylocity.
Ms. Weber?
Thank you. I just wanted to confirm that you're comfortable. It sounds like you're comfortable that you accomplished what you were asked to do. This is getting the duties divided as
Pretty good.
as was asked for. Thank you for your work.
Mr. Kissinger?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I move that we accept these changes as presented.
Is there a second? Mr. Washington seconds. Do we need a roll call on this?
Should.
Don't.
We could do it, might as well.
All right, let's do a roll call vote.
Mr. Lear,
Aye.
Mr. Washington,
Aye.
Mr. Byrne,
Aye.
Ms. Weber, Mr. Payton,
Aye.
Ms. Parker, Mr. Kinzinger,
Aye.
Ms. Haas, Mr. Swanson, Mr. Wheeler,
Aye.
motion carries.
Point of clarification, if I could.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to at least make sure the committee knows the difference between the year-end close and the audit, the outside audit we do at the end of the year. We will still manage the outside audit, but the year-end close will become the responsibility, as it should, of the auditor's office for the next close. So they're going to close their own year of business, if you will. So that it's not just here. Every board manages the outside audit. That's a financial process. So I want to make sure we knew that. We weren't abdicating that responsibility as part of this change.
Thank you. The credit card policy.
The credit card policy, there are changes to that for a couple reasons. One was our change in vendor, and the other, another is because of the move of some of the activities down to the auditor's office. We wanted checks and balances in there. And then thirdly, we implemented the recommendations from SKDO after their agreed upon procedures in reviewing our current. So since the issues with the credit card, the finance group has been monitoring those balances monthly. So I went ahead and put that into the policy that they continue to do that. It goes to the auditor's office for entry. The auditor's office continues to do, as they do now, the manual journal entry every month that takes specific expense lines from the clearing account into each department. So nothing changes in that process. The only thing that will change is that adjusting journal entry, because that's a manual entry, will come up to administration for posting. And posting, when I say posting, that's pushing a button to approve it. And approving, you receive the manual entry document, review it for accuracy, and then go ahead and post the entry.
Questions? A motion to approve the proposed policy. Mr. Byrne, is there a second? Mr. Payton?
Question.
Mr. Wheeler?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Could you describe the checks and balances within this credit card policy we have right here, as far as who is auditing the transactions to make sure they're compliant with moral, ethical, county policy, all of that kind of stuff?
That remains with the auditor's office. No change to what we're doing now. The piece that's moving is on the front end. The actual request for new cards will come through administration. And then when the statements come in, just like now, Steve's office will be.
That's a change.
That's a change. Compiling the actual, making the claim form.
I got a claim up, right.
Making the claim form. But that goes to the audit. That is the monthly entry that is I want to say one line. It's essentially charging the clearing account and paying the bill to the vendor. So AP, it's a credit to AP and a debit to this clearing account. The actual auditing of all the claims, the actual review of those, charging that to every specific department remains with the auditor's office.
And is there any other checks and balances in that system to that's it? I mean, issuing new cards,
Issuing new cards moves to administration.
and we're doing that now anyway, pretty
Right.
much. Okay, thank you.
We have a motion to approve on this. And I think this can be a voice vote. Yeah, I would think. So all in favor of the motion to approve the credit card policy, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carries. Thank you very much. That should take care of Administration Department for this morning. Treasurer's Office, Mr. Africano. You've received the Treasurer's report through communication. Don't do a roll call on this one.
Good morning. This should only take about 45 minutes, so. I just wanted to say, just an aside, gosh, that was great news to hear about the insurance. That's a huge deal, and I'm probably one of those top 5 users. Unfortunately, I have a sick child, and Mike has been incredible, and I got caught in that, not a national plan issue, and it can be troublesome. So I really appreciate the hard work Anita and Mike have done on that. Just a few things. Tax sale will be on November 13th, Wednesday, 9 a.m. in this room. If anybody's interested in seeing what that looks like, you're welcome to attend. It's probably 30 tax buyers. It's all automated. It'll go to about 12:30, and we'll sell all delinquencies by then. This month, or this week, I'm sorry, we will publish delinquencies in the paper. So you'll see them in your local papers and in the journal. We've had, as you probably know, some papers have closed. And so we've spent less money publishing because those papers are no longer available to us. So I suppose that's a positive from our standpoint, but maybe a loss from our community. I had one pretty important issue that came up over the last 2 weeks. We have had fraud on our general tax operating account, which is our largest account. And what happens is it's you would think it would be very difficult, but it's actually not. What people have learned to do is pull a check from the mail, see our routing number, see our account number, and create a fake check. So that was discovered and in our jury account and in tax operating jury account. Any kind of fraud is important, but the balances in that account are never that large. But in the other account, they are. We probably had about 15 to 20 checks presented over the last 2 weeks. Some from Alabama, some from California. I think they get in these networks and they sell these numbers. So that's the bad news. The good news is probably $3,000 to $4,000 was paid by the bank, which the bank is liable for. We are not. Much of what was presented now has been returned. But the positive in all of it is we are now instituting, and we'll spread this out across the whole county as time goes on. We're starting in my office to start with something called positive pay. And what positive pay is, for those that don't know, when, and this is a little bit of an issue with MIP as well, because MIP doesn't make this very easy for us. So we've gone out and got some software on our own at the cost of $20 a month, which is negligible. When you do a check run, when that check run goes to the bank, you will forward an electronic file to the bank that says these are the checks in the check run and these are who they're written to and for what amounts. If a check is presented that's not on that positive pay sheet, it's automatically rejected. The bigger banks are going to this, obviously, because of the fraud that's out there. So we will do this as a matter of course. We've already started doing it on 2 accounts. We're training today, and this will be a matter of policy in my office. And then we'll roll this out to everybody else in the county as time goes on. And there's some questions about, at the jury account, pulling that file out, because file has to come out of your system in a certain way, be formatted, because every bank has their own way they like it, or there's 6 or 7 standards, I guess. But the good news is it was caught, and the better news is it's not going to happen again, because we are on top of it, and we'll be dealing with it on a go-forward basis. But it's out there. So, and you have to imagine jury sends out hundreds of checks, the jury account, and they're all in the mail. And simply open one, you have everything on there you can need, and you can get anything you need on the internet to create a check. And they look real, and they're not signed by me, so they don't have my signature, but.
Mr. Byrne?
Thank you. Nick, great job on identifying that. How was that identified? Was it internally, externally? Was it a bank coming to you?
No, it was through the reconciliation process in my office.
Okay, so your staff,
my staff got it.
Great, thank you. Great job.
Any other questions? If there are no other questions, can we have a motion to combine and approve the treasurer's report, the collector's report, and the monthly resolutions? Ms. Parker, Ms. Weber for a second. All in favor of accepting the report, say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Motion carries. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Sheriff's Department, you have the monthly update. As it was presented to criminal justice, so you can examine that. Good morning.
Good morning.
What can you share with us?
Good morning, everybody. A couple things. Probably most importantly on our end, the EAP, the Employee Assistance Program that Anita talked about and Mike Lynch talked about, very important for our employees, especially those in law enforcement, but in addition to all of our county employees, because of things that are happening out in society. I mean, things happen, and it obviously happens more in law enforcement areas than others, but we are fortunate to have it. I know our department has utilized it, and we encourage it for our employees. So thank you to Mike and Anita for following up on that. Also to you, the Finance Committee, the full county board, Chairman Wheeler, department heads and elected officials for working hard to get our county back in the black. We still have a lot of work to do, but we are definitely heading in the right direction, and hopefully we'll continue to do so. And it's a credit to you guys for what you do for all of us and all of our employees. So thank you. As far as the things on my agenda, our out-of-county numbers are staying relatively flat, which they really can't go much higher. So flat in this case is a good thing. We do have a little bit of a concern with our local numbers. Our local numbers continue to increase, and quite honestly, we can't figure out why. Because of the bail reform and things like that we thought would certainly reduce our local population, it hasn't. So we continue to work with our state's attorney. Locally, we provide programs internally inside the jail. And so, the idea is, in spite of what people may think, we don't want to keep people in jail. We want people out and being productive and taxpayers and contributing to society. So we will continue to work on that. I do have a meeting set up with our state's attorney to talk about options. So those are certainly things that we will continue to work on, but you should be aware that part of our cost in our budget, as our local population increases, so do our local costs. So those are obviously significant costs for us. So questions on that part of it?
Mr. Searoy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sheriff, that's one of the thoughts that I had when we were talking budget is for the public defender, you know, getting more full-time people might help alleviate some of the pressure in corrections.
I would agree. On top of that, with the full-time PD, focusing strictly on those cases, those types of cases would certainly be benefit, along with probation, which I believe is starting some pretrial release things that would also help. You know, part of the problem is, and you know, people don't understand what happens when, you know, somebody gets out of jail, whether they post bond or whatever, or if, in this case, probation supervises them. If they don't show up to court, that creates a whole nother workload for everybody in our system. And we end up from the judges to the clerks to the state's attorney to the public defenders to our office to the circuit clerk's office, everybody. But nobody takes that into consideration when these people are getting out of jail, not showing up to court. I mean, everybody laughs about Warrant Wednesday and nobody wants to end up on Warrant Wednesday, but you know, the success rate of Warrant Wednesday is 75% success, but that costs money. It costs money not from only from our department, but from everybody's department, because we had to put these people out there. Paperwork goes from the circuit clerk's office to CANCOM to us. Our officers are out there, and it also puts our officers in a dangerous situation. How many times have you seen recently where officers are going to a house to serve a warrant and end up getting killed? I mean, that's reality. And so every time there's a warrant issued and the burden is placed on local police to go get this individual, we're at risk. And so, you know, those things are certainly a burden on us, but you know, again, it is what it is. I mean, we'll continue to fight.
Well, we were thinking about it, so I just want to let you aware.
Appreciate it. I think Tom's office will help a lot because these people will be supervised. Hopefully, you know, we can get them to court, get them through the process, get them through the entire court process,
clear,
regardless of innocence, guilt, whatever. That's not our concern. One other issue on our report that is certainly an important issue for us, and that is traffic fatalities. I've addressed this at the Criminal Justice Committee. For those of you that have heard this, I apologize, but I think it's important to remind people. Last year in 2018, countywide, we had 9 fatalities due to car accidents. This year in October or whatever, before Halloween, we're at 22. And that is an issue for us, certainly something that we are focusing on. Those, you know, and the confusion I think lies somewhere that they're not all on county roads, but every road in our county is what I consider a county road. So, you know, we are focusing on dangerous intersections, where these things are happening, common occurrences. And you know, I can't remind people enough that, you know, they need to pay attention when they're driving. I mean, I don't know how we get that word out other than continue to write tickets for using your cell phone. But, you know, that's not going to stop it. So we are working on that with some local legislators, local communities, local fire chiefs, and we will continue to identify those. Obviously, the goal is to get that down to 0. And we will continue to try and reach that goal. So, but I thought you should be aware that it's been a bad year, fatality-wise, on our roadways. That's all for the report. The other, any questions on that? My only other issue is our vehicle requests. As you may recall, the Criminal Justice Committee, your committee, and the county board approved us to purchase vehicles. And when we went to order the vehicles, the Tahoes have been ordered. There's no issue with the Tahoes. However, the Dodge trucks that we thought we were going to save all this money for, and I think my personal feeling is that Dodge realized that the price they gave us was, they weren't probably going to make any money off it, so they are not making those trucks this year. We're assuming they're going to make them next year, but we're not sure. And the second thing we're not sure of is the price. We knew what the price was this year. We don't know what the price is next year. So I went out and sought another option that were still cheaper than Tahoes, but obviously more expensive than the Dodge trucks. And those were Ford Explorers. My original ask was for 7 for the sheriff's office. And based on the price, if I were to reduce that number by 1, I would still need $19,975 more. And that's what I'm asking for, is to reduce that number by 1, but it needs approval for another $19,975.
Was this presented to criminal justice?
Yes. Yeah, it was forwarded
Did
here.
they send a recommendation?
They sent it here.
All right. Questions? Could we have a motion to approve the increase? Mr. Payton, Mr. Swanson seconds. Discussion. Hearing no discussion. This involves money, so we'll need a roll call vote.
Mr. Lear,
Aye.
Mr. Washington,
Aye.
Mr. Byrne,
Aye.
Ms. Weber,
Aye.
Mr. Payton,
Aye.
Ms. Parker,
Aye.
Mr. Kinzinger, Ms. Haas, Mr. Swanson,
Aye.
Mr. Wheeler. Motion carries.
Okay, thank you,
That's all I got. Thank you.
Yes.
Real quick, thank you, sir. Before the sheriff got down, I want to mention in the budget, we have a revenue number of 12.4 on corrections. That's a projection on, you know, and we're up basically full house, if you will. I just remind the committee that number floats. It could be more, it could be a little less. So I just wanted to, if we get back here and we're at a 12 million number, that's still a good number. And so I would just like to mention that we're doing what we can with what we're given. If that makes
Appreciate
sense.
that. And that, I mean, again, could that number go up? Possibly. But it's more likely to be less, would be my, if I were to guess. Only because that's the only way it can really go. I mean, it can't go
Right.
up higher.
Can't
If it's
go
going
much
to
higher.
yeah.
And if
Hopefully
you
it stays the same and we're right on.
And if you look at our budget, it's a balanced budget, but don't forget there's a surplus built into the budget on debt reduction. So it's not like, you know, we're going over, if you will,
Right.
on expense. We got it built into there so we can reduce our interfund debt. So
And that's the goal.
that's why those things exist.
Yep.
Okay.
And we'll work hard to maintain that, Mr. Chairman.
All right. The auditor's office, Mr. Lee. Claims report has been submitted to you. And so let's deal with that first. A motion to approve the claims, monthly claims would be in order. Mr. Kissinger, a second. Mr. Swanson, I will need a roll call vote on approving the monthly claims.
Mr. Lear,
Aye.
Mr. Washington,
Aye.
Mr. Byrne,
Aye.
Ms. Weber,
Aye.
Mr. Payton,
Aye.
Ms. Parker,
Aye.
Mr. Kinzinger, Ms. Haas, Mr. Swanson, Mr. Wheeler. Motion carries.
Mr. Lee, you have some things for us.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, members of the committee. So first, I did want to acknowledge, if I'm not mistaken, I believe the county board chairman's birthday was yesterday. So I would like to acknowledge that and wish him a happy birthday. Anyway, you got the email reported, or the claims report emailed to you. We've got what our recommendations are already. I won't belabor that point insofar as the content and so forth of the report. We had intended, so unless there are any specific questions about the claims report, I will just move right along since the hour is far spent.
Mr. Byrne.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jake, hello.
Good morning.
I have a question for you.
Yes,
Just a
sir.
simple yes or no. In 3 years, been an auditor. Have you come across any illegal, fraudulent, or missing monies in your audits? How many audits? Just a simple yes or no. Have you found any activity that you would have to refer to an outside source potentially?
I won't answer that with a yes or no. I will say so far, and from what we have been able to do, I don't know if anything rises to the level of defalcation or illegality.
Illegal, missing
but,
monies,
there is
fraudulent
certainly
behavior. That's
misappropriate things.
a simple yes or no. That's all I was asking for.
That is not a yes or no answer, but it is. There are certainly inappropriate things that have happened that we've recommended against.
Would they be illegal?
I'm not an attorney, so I'm not going to answer the illegality question. Okay, thank you.
If you want to go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much. So I did have an individual here. I'm recommending a program that I would like to ask. He had an issue come up, and so if it pleases the chairman, I would like to ask to table this presentation and bring it back to the committee. It is our goal to provide more transparency, accountability, efficiency through not only the budgetary process, but also how the county reports to the voting public the way in which they use their money in an interactive solution. But I will send out some information ahead of time regarding OpenGov. It is a program that many other counties are using, and the state of Illinois, the Treasurer's Department uses as well. Peoria County, Kane County are two counties in particular. And it's used across the country. So if it pleases the chairman, I would like to ask to table this actual presentation and bring it back to the committee.
At the request of the auditor, a motion to table would be in order. Can I have Ms. Weber, Mr. Byrne? A motion to table is not debatable, so a voice vote. All in favor of tabling the presentation, say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Motion carries.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. Have a good day.
We move to an ordinance establishing a county cannabis retailer's occupation tax in the county of Kankakee, amending resolution 2019-09-10-151. Mr. Wheeler, do you want to
Thank
speak
you.
to that?
You may remember that we established the tax rate for both the rural and municipal, the county tax rate for the rural and municipal in the event that they're in the rural area, that we still have to vote on whether we're going to allow that or not. That was established at 3%. We established 0.75 for the municipal areas. We had to send that into, I believe it was Commerce. Yeah, it was Department of Commerce. They came back and said, oh, we changed the law. You can get up to 3% in the municipalities. And so it was the desire of the committee last month to bring this back on something we could vote on. The basic question is would you like to amend that original ordinance to say they're both 3%? Or, I mean, we'll take the municipal one to 3%. So that's really the only question on the table right now. The other question will be debated at the full board meeting in November. So if there's any questions, when we voted, they hadn't changed the law yet, so.
Is there a motion? Mr. Washington, motion to approve? Is there a second? Ms. Weber?
And by the way, Mr. Chairman, if I will.
Yes.
It can be any number between 0.75 and 3. It doesn't have to be 3. I just want to mention that as well. If you think it should
Mr.
be something
Washington, you're
less,
saying 3?
3. Okay.
The second saying 3? All right. So that's determined. Any discussion on that? I know the hour is late. I would make a couple of comments. I think that as we move along in this, Finance Committee needs to look closely at what is going to be our treatment of the money that we receive in terms of revenue under this occupation tax if we choose to opt in, and looking at both the revenue expense sides. But I think that may be a discussion for a later time, so I'm going to hold on my comments there. But it is something that I think is, as a board member, I believe we need to look at closely. Mr. Seroy, you had a comment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So we were gonna change this resolution to reflect 3% instead of the 0.75. Are we gonna get another resolution at the November meeting, or is this?
Is
we're
it
just-
3.75?
Well,
It says
0.75 on this one, and are we gonna change that?
Yes,
Okay.
it'll be changed, it'll come back as an amended resolution.
Okay, that's what I was wondering.
It'll
Okay,
have both numbers on there.
right.
All right.
Thank you.
Any other questions on that? We're not spending any money on this, so I think this can be a voice vote. All right. All in favor of the motion, say aye. Opposed, nay. Motion carries. Is there any other old business? Any new business? A motion to adjourn would be in order. Ms. Weber? Is there a second? I didn't see the second. Where's the second? All right, Mr. Wheeler seconds. All in favor say aye. Opposed, nay. We are adjourned.